All right, let's get started. So first off, thank you all so much for being here today. I know it's your first StirTrek session of 2026, so I'm very honored. My name is Christine. I led some of the first Agile transformations when I was at McKinsey. And so this was like post-iPhone, early SaaS, people still getting like Scrum certifications. Since then, I was most recently GM at OnSIP, where I took my team there through 2 really challenging acquisitions, and basically spent most of my day explaining to bankers basic technical concepts. I also spent a lot of my time telling our private equity overlords to please not fire all the engineers. This is all to say I basically spent my life working with engineering to help them justify its existence. And especially in challenging non-technical environments where engineering is the minority. So this topic of getting critical engineering work prioritized is something that's really near and dear to my heart. Quick note, for those of you in the overflow rooms and everyone here, there is a Discord forum. So if you have any questions, please put them in there. I'll be sure to get to them if we can't get to them in this session. Alrighty. So let's jump in. Everyone who works in engineering knows the thing. Sometimes it's an overdue refactoring. It might be a migration that won't end. And sometimes it's a resilience or it's a resilience problem. These things all have a lot in common. First off, they're legitimate horror films. And the other part is that they never actually get prioritized, because everyone in engineering can see these problems really clearly, but they seem invisible when you're not technical. And so when we try and escalate these issues, when you try and get them prioritized, this is often the advice we get. Have you tried explaining the business impact? Show ROI, demonstrate results fast, consider industry benchmarks, and my favorite, be proactive. Just get ahead of tech debt. This is also how I feel about this advice, because this is what it gives to me. Have you considered raising revenue and lowering costs, not the other way around? It's theoretically and literally correct, but functionally, it's completely useless. So let's break this down. Here's your typical tech debt project. It's a legacy behemoth, it's a tax on every single project, and it's also unknowably complex. Nobody remembers how it connects to billing or the ERP. It's a little bit like going down to your basement, opening up your breaker panel, and seeing this, right? And so normally when you see this, the right thing to do, close the panel, back away slowly, and pretend you saw nothing, right? Don't touch the scary box. Like, this is not a moment to get your Marie Kondo out. But what if you're rapidly renovating? What if the electric grid's getting updated? All of a sudden, from back away slowly, this becomes a legitimate business risk. So now we have to write a business case. The problem? This is the worst possible scenario for a business case. It's strategic. It takes weeks just to scope and do a spike. It's ambiguous. There are no industry benchmarks because everything's proprietary. And most important, there's no clear ROI. How do you assign a dollar value on a project for not maybe exploding the company? But most times, we stuff it into a business case anyway. We shrink the resourcing because we're trying to make the ask a lot more palatable. We add really aggressive milestones because we have to show results fast. And then we make up an ROI. We come up with something. We're going to 10x our productivity. We're going to shorten our cycle times. Our CTO or our engineering leader, most people aren't doing this to pull a fast one. They're doing it because the work is needed. But inadvertently, they're also setting up their teams to fail because there are two possible outcomes at this point, and both of them are pretty scary. One, the project gets greenlit, and now the team is set up to deliver with a skeleton crew against fairy tale timelines and ROI. But way more commonly, nothing happens. See, this business case doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's being compared against legitimate business cases. A 7-figure sales deal, shiny new features, AI. And the bottom line is that eat your vegetables is neither sexy nor is it urgent. And no one really believes that this is going to explode since you spent the last decade closing the panel and backing away and pretending it doesn't exist. So we have all lived this, seeing the thing, bending over backwards to explain it, and then watching helplessly as it doesn't get done again. But here's what's interesting. This happens all the time in engineering, but it's pretty much unthinkable anywhere else. There's no other function that has to bend over backwards to explain themselves the way engineering does. So why is this? Here's what we take for granted in other functions. We have a common sense, intuitive understanding. We get metrics, and from that, we have insight. But this is what goes on in engineering. There's no understanding, and we have a lot of metrics, but we can't really extrapolate insight. And oftentimes, when we try and solve for this problem, we don't notice the lack of understanding. We try and throw more metrics at the problem. And when that happens, we end up with whatever the hell this is. And part of this is because engineering tends to be a really data-driven function. We love data. But there's also some fairly toxic undercurrents and beliefs that underpin this. Engineering is uniquely complex. Engineering is unlike any other function. Engineering is special. So I'm going to disprove this in 2 slides. One, without understanding, every other function looks exactly like engineering. And if you've been in orgs where someone doesn't really understand marketing or sales or so on and so forth, you'll recognize this. Marketing needs brand investment, but we only measure cost per leads. Sales, trying to close deals that are actually realistic, but management only cares about top of funnel and deal size. The C-suite, our CEO needs an executive assistant, but the board only cares about EBITDA. And legal, writing a business case on the ROI of staying compliant when laws change. So the failure modes are identical. It's just a lot more common in engineering. And the reason it's so uncommon in engineering is because in these other functions, one, we expect understanding. A CEO that doesn't get marketing doesn't get the job. And we also teach frameworks, not immediate application. A CEO is expected to understand the idea of a customer journey and a customer funnel, not just in the abstract, but at their company. But they're not sent to like an ad content boot camp. And I think even more importantly, our metrics don't abstract away work. Is there any other function that expresses itself to other functions in story points and t-shirt sizes? So this is the root cause of why understanding is so uncommon for engineering organizations. But the truth is that engineering is a knowable, tangible operation. There are best practices. It is unique and valuable and quirky, just like every other function, but you can also learn it just like any other function. So, how do we build this for engineering? So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how do we go through and quickly work with stakeholders to build an engineering mental model. We're going to visualize resourcing, maintenance, and architecture and kind of expose how they relate to one another. And then we're going to use this framework and we're going to apply it to some real-world complex engineering horror stories to make what's going on really intuitive and transparent. Meet Game Time. So they're gonna be our little guinea pig for the day. They do scorekeeping for Little League teams, and they've been knocking it out of the park. So how do we go and get Game Time set up? Well, first off, we define Game Time's business functions. And the idea here is to just list out what are the important pillars of the business that Game Time is supporting, that engineering needs to support. This changes over time, right? So right now, you see onboarding. So that might be important while they're growing, but maybe in a couple of quarters, they focus on retention instead. The next thing we do is we take Game Time's tech stack and split it out into skills and competencies. Competencies are groups of skills, and they kind of represent the knowledge that needs to be had in order to do the jobs on the platform. And you'll notice a skill can be a technology, but it can also be a business knowledge, processes, or workflows. The key is to document these core areas of knowledge so that you can sort of understand what do you need to know in order to maintain and run the platform. You can kind of enrich this data with the idea of recency and popularity. And so recency is how do you figure out how up-to-date a dependency is relative to the organization's maintenance targets. Popularity is relative interoperability. In this one, it's just stars on GitHub. But what we're trying to surface in this view is the idea that not all front ends are the same. Front end for Game Time is probably different for front end in another organization. Maybe they use Angular or whatever. And I think also more importantly, when we look at Game Time's backend, you'll notice a bunch of things in there that are null and have no stars, right? Their scorekeeping logic and user login services, all of this is proprietary and completely maintained in-house. So you can't go out and actually hire somebody that knows Game Time's backend. We take the competencies and skills, we take the functions, and we can construct this empty grid. Now we can mark out where those skills kind of intersect. And this gives you, just at a glance, an idea of how much maintenance needs to be done. We can enrich this data further. So we take our competencies and skills again, but now we're looking at the team members who work at Game Time. And what we're grading here isn't how good someone is or how many years of experience or what their title is. We're trying to understand who knows what, who has done what, and who can take Game Time's platform forward. And so building this mental model, both of what is your platform, what's the surface area, and also understanding your account from this lens, helps you see risks and bottlenecks in your org. So in this one, pretty clearly, hey Jessica, She's the only person who knows the back-end scorekeeping logic, which is essential to doing any major work in the back-end. And she's also the only person who knows a lot of things spanning the entire stack. And people like Jessica are typically buried, right? And the idea here is, how do we surface these glue roles where Jessica may or may not actually be having the most PRs or doing the most quote-unquote work. She might just be supporting and reviewing work for others. So now let's put it all together. We've got our empty platform map. We had all our data from who knows what. And now we can fill it in. And so again, there are lots of different ways you can enrich the platform map, but this gives you a very basic view of resilience and also your capacity, right? So in this example, there are 6 ICs who can maintain and involve like the front end for baseball, softball, or team management. But only Jessica knows the scorekeeping logic. There's no good or bad, right? It all depends on the context. If this entire team were only 6 people, this would be a rock star team. But if this were 200 people, 1,000 people, it'd be a pretty scary chart. And it's not about memorizing scenarios and numbers. It's just about creating this framework that even folks who aren't technical can it's kind of like a bento box, right? Where they can then go in and organize their thinking so that when you throw facts at them, they actually have a place to go. And it's the same kind of intuition that you have for almost any other domain. So I'll pause there for a moment. Any questions so far before we dive into some other horror stories and revisiting them, hopefully with better endings? All right, cool. Let's move on. So let's apply this and revisit some of the tropes that we saw. Double feature number 1. Game Time needs to make the case for refactoring the existing backend to separate out scorekeeping. It's pretty obvious that needs to be done. This is going to require deprecating the old service while building the new one with their limited resourcing. Read Jessica. So first, we put the refactor into context. Yeah, it's a scary box. And why it's now an exploding scary box is because Game Time's trying to expand into basketball, volleyball, and soccer. So now going through and having scorekeeping organized the way it is already kind of untenable. But when they add these when they add additional sports, it's just going to get way worse. It makes it pretty obvious for everyone, even if you're not technical. But now that everyone gets the problem, we can plan it. We can sketch out and share what the new architecture will actually look like. We're breaking out scorekeeping into its own competency. And we're also really careful to explain that whilst this new competency and service is being built, the old infrastructure still has to stay standing. We still have to maintain things. And that's, again, only Jessica. But we can also use this as a way to show how this is potentially an opportunity to upskill new team members. So in this case, Jessica also pulls Rob and Kara as they build out the new scorekeeping service. And that way, they're never going to have this issue where they're single-threaded ever again. So we've done the planning, right? But the migration doesn't end from there. We can tell people what we want to do, but how do we show progress over the next 6 months, next 7 months? So let's show what reporting might look like month over month for this project. Month 0 is our starting point. Month 2, new scaffolding is up. Talent starts to develop. Talent continues to develop. Again, no new features, nothing has been built. We've just created error cover so the team can pair program. And month 4, actually nothing changes because it's little leak season and Jessica is too busy with production issues. Month 5, our skills hardened further and we're actually able to break ground on infrastructure work for basketball. Again, nothing that a stakeholder could see in a demo. And then by month 6, we finally deprecate the old scorekeeping logic. You weren't supposed to see that just yet. But just at a glance, right? We've explained something that would normally be so painful and difficult for folks who aren't technical to understand and get on board with. But we can not only help them get on board with it, we help them see the right answer in a really intuitive way. And then while the project's going through, we're also maintaining momentum, excitement, and trust because we're being really transparent and clear about what's going on. All right, another feature. This is an old but new one. The CEO wants Game Time to transform into an AI-first company yesterday. At the same time, he also wants to right-size everybody. AI should have 10x their productivity, right? So first, we stop, drop, and roll. We say, wait, what do you mean you want to be an AI-first company? Do you want us to use Copilot? Do you want us to build out agentic workflows? Are you looking for new features? What is it? And we kind of use this framework to go through every single one of these options and assess its level of effort, costs, benefits, yada, yada. So first, coding agents. Pretty easy to add. They don't really impact any competencies. They might be able to accelerate your onboarding a little bit, and you can help cross-skill on some mundane tasks. But this isn't exactly like a 10x productivity boost or a game changer. It's an optimization. And we're pretty sure this is not what the CEO wants, and he confirms it. But maybe he wants to add AI features. One thing you can do is just buy it from a third party. But this adds a pretty real third-party risk. You still don't actually own any of the AI. And plus, it's a YC startup who knows what they're going to do and who knows what they're doing with your data. And so again, our CEO is like, no, we don't want this. All right, we want to build in-house features. You still need to add a skill and competency for AI, right? But I think the other thing that's worth emphasizing here is that this stuff is moving really quickly, right? Like, we are constantly getting bombarded with shinier and shinier toys, and what's best practice today might not be best practice in a month. So you're adding this competency to your platform, but one of the rubs here is that at the same time, you have to constantly keep up to date with it. You might make it doesn't actually make things easier because you're making things more complex and more difficult to maintain. And agentic workflows are no different. If you don't want to end up in MCP multiverse hell, you have to do the same thing, right? And not to mention, individual competencies will need to adapt. And it's not just a new skill inside an existing competency. You're often creating a whole new competency. It's a little bit like a Matryoshka doll of skills, right? Because you need to know, for front end, you now need to know React, TypeScript, and whatever it is you're using for AI. You also need to kind of hold separately AI and how that coding agent understands React and TypeScript and whatever LLM magic is running under the hood. I actually really, and I think once you go through that, most times the CEO doesn't really want to dive into some of the gnarlier competencies. So they don't want to talk about backend, right? And as we had this conversation, we inadvertently addressed right sizing, right? Because right-sizing and being an AI-first company are actually two completely different things. And by the time our stakeholders really understand the amount of work it takes to get AI up and running and transform the company, they understand, and the conversation about taking people away from the team really go off the table. So we've run through this tutorial, and hopefully this framework has given you guys a sense of how easy it can be to communicate some of these things that are just common sense. And once that happens, everyone can see the thing, everyone gets it, we all band together, there are no convoluted questions or weird business cases, and everyone celebrates as a team, because work that's visible is work that's actually appreciated. So thank you all so much. That just about wraps it. I will take questions next. But if you like this talk, my Substack is over there. And I'm also launching a technical accounting Claude skill. So basically, any time you enter plan mode, it would give you a snapshot of what your platform looks like and where changes would be. It's so alpha that you actually have to just drop me an email or add me on LinkedIn, and when it's ready, I'll send you the GitHub link. But thank you all so much. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you happen to have a template for your mental model, like bare bones?
I'm so sorry?
Do you have a template for the bare bones of the mental model?
So the question was, do you have a template for the bare bones of that mental model? And the answer is not really, because every organization ends up being really different, right? And so I think the litmus test, right, is when you're thinking about something like the competencies and defining out the business functions, like oftentimes talking to someone in product will give you a pretty good idea of what the business functions are. But for competencies, it's a little bit of an exercise of organizing your stack and playing around with this idea of like, well, what do I need to know in order to do this, and finding out those clusters. But yeah, hopefully the Claude skill will automate a lot of the interviews and a lot of the rote stuff that we have to do to get there. Yes?
I have a lot of tech debt on my project right now, and we're in a good schedule of release work for, I don't know, 6 weeks to 6 months, then release. Is there a certain time along the normal project timeline that you think is a good time to bring to the business, like, hey, this is a good time to tackle some of our tech debt and bring them your mental model?
The question was, is there a good time to go to the business, bring this up, and it sounds like both a right time to tackle tech debt and also potentially introduce a framework like this, right? So I'd say introducing a framework like this is as early as possible is the best way to do it, because the first time you do this, they're not going to absorb everything, right? This just gives them kind of that mental box so that when more facts are introduced, right, they're actually retaining them. There's a place for those facts, right? So what I found, because I've spent the last couple of years working with clients developing this, month one, right, it's still painful. But after a couple of sprints, you actually take a lot of like the quote unquote dumb questions or obvious questions off the table, because they actually can understand what's needed, right? So the idea is like, as soon as you have tech debt, start to introduce this framework, right? And then the end goal is that they can actually start to anticipate and even preempting tech debt in the first place. Any other questions? Oh, I should check the Discord. Well, actually, no, it's fine. I can let you guys out early, and if you guys have, oh, yes, question.
Great topic. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts regarding what person within an organization would be best suited to maintain the grid, to manage the grid, and keep it updated over time.
Ooh, so the question is, who is the person in the organization best suited to maintain and update the grid? So I've been working primarily with CTOs over the last year, with close partnership with the C-suite. I think it ultimately is engineering's prerogative and responsibility because it's an engineering artifact, right? So letting engineering own the reporting chain of that, I think actually helps a little bit with the kind of secondhand thing that happens with product, where product ends up being engineering's mouthpiece, right? But this gives engineering a tool to advocate for themselves, though I have also seen it deployed where it's like the CEO is very on board and the entire executive team feels responsible, right? Where they understand that tech debt isn't just an engineering problem, right? Because if the rest of the organization is asking them for outsized velocity, they're also creating the tech debt. Alrighty, thank you guys so much. I'll let you guys go. If you guys have questions in the Discord, I don't have Wi-Fi here, but I will make sure to get to them, or just come hang out and see me after.